My name's Peter Londey. I'm a pacifist personally, but a lot of my work seems to have revolved around violence and responses to it in one way or another. For the last 10 or so years I've been teaching ancient Greek history here at ANU, and the Greeks obviously fought endless, violent, ugly wars with each other. There's an enormous amount of violence in Greek history, and it's violence of a peculiarly tough kind. Dave Grossman regards killing somebody by poking a pointed weapon into their body as the second most challenging form of killing after killing with your bare hands. So, as a result, I mean, there are questions, why didn't the Greeks all suffer from PTSD? And Adrian White, my PhD student in the front row here, is actually writing a PhD thesis on that very question. Did the Greeks get PTSD? I'm interested in Milos, the little island there, where the Athenians massacred the adult male population and sold the women and children into slavery in 416 BC because the Melians, who were neutral, wouldn't come over to their side. There are cultural responses to that. Euripides' play Trojan Women seems to be an immediate and probably critical response to what the Athenians had done. But Greeks often were very happy to accept that gross level of violence. Thucydides' Melian Dialogue, a classic piece of political literature written a few years later, again comes back to Milos, but I think takes a much more ambivalent attitude. So I think there are very interesting things to say about Greek responses to violence and cultural responses often. I spent a lot of my career at the Australian War Memorial, so I wrote History of Australian Peacekeeping, Other People's Wars, and have recently contributed to the now complete official history of Australian peacekeeping. So up the top there you actually have the very first UN peacekeepers, and who were Australians. So this has been part of Australia's response to violence in the world. Apart from fighting wars ourselves, we also have sent peacekeepers to something like 30 different areas of conflict. So I've written a lot about that and interviewed a lot of peacekeepers. And so it's interesting when you actually talk to people about their responses to the things that they see, not necessarily things they're doing, but the things that they've seen. And I have a PhD student work at an early stage working on a thesis on moral injury in peacekeeping operations. Peacekeepers suffer a lot from their inability to change things and from just seeing ugly actions happen. So this is sort of a subset of PTSD. I'm also now currently working on a biography of the Australian artist George Gittoes, most of whose career has been responding to violence. I think of all Australian artists, he's the one who has most dealt with violence. He himself has visited about 30 different conflict areas. He was at the Cabello massacre. This image here is his attempt to portray something which is basically not portrayable. The people who suffering from machete wounds who are flickering between life and death at Cabello. He's very interested in what happens to local people during this sort of violence. So that's a woman in Somalia trying to rescue her kids. Obviously, as other people have said, the multicultural aspect of this is really important. So, for example, in classics, and classics has a lot to contribute to this, we have another PhD student who's working on comparison between Roman and Sri Lankan poetry written after periods of conflict. So that sort of multicultural approach is obviously really important.